Okay, so this video is going to be on circles. Now, before I get started with some questions, I'm just going to run through a couple of keywords that I'll be using throughout the video that you need to know to understand what I'm talking about. So first off, we've got this word circumference. Now, circumference is the distance all the way around the outside of the circle. Now, usually we call the distance around a shape the perimeter, but for a circle we call it the circumference. A second word is radius, and that is also a distance, but this is the straight line distance from the center to the edge, to the circumference. We also have another straight line in the circle called the diameter, and this is the distance all the way across the circle from one point on the circumference to the other, but passing through the center. Now, if you want to answer a circles question in your GCSE, you're going to have to learn a couple of formula. Now, these are not given in your formula section at the front of your paper, so you need to make sure that you know these off by heart. So firstly, there are two formula that are useful to know for the circumference. The first that involves the radius. Now, that is 2 times pi times the radius, or 2 pi r, and another involving diameter, which is pi times diameter, or pi d. There's only one formula, so you've only got one choice for the area, and that is pi times r squared. Now, just bear in mind that squaring a number means timesing by itself, not timesing by 2. Hopefully you'll notice that all of these formulas contain this Greek letter pi. Now, pi is a number that we can get on our calculator, and I'll quickly show you how to do this, and then we'll have a look at some questions. Okay, so this is the calculator that we recommend you use in school. It is the one that we generally will demonstrate with. In order to get pi on this calculator, first we need to push this button here, the shift button, and pushing it once, okay, we then push this button down the bottom here. Now, if you notice, this button down the bottom here, at the top, has the symbol pi. So hopefully when you've done that, you'll get the symbol pi coming up on your calculator. So just to recap on that, to get pi, what we need to do is push shift once, and then push this button down the bottom here, which is a times 10 with a little x on the top. Okay, so after you push equals, then you push this SD button, you'll get this decimal number coming out, which is 3.14159. And in fact it will keep going forever and ever. Okay, so now that we know how to get pi on our calculator, let's have a little look at some questions. So here I've got an example of two different types of circles they could give you. We'll start with the one on the left, okay, and hopefully you can spot that what you're given here is the radius, okay, and the radius here is 4. So the first question it's asking us to calculate the circumference, giving your answer to 2 decimal places. So our formula for finding the circumference using a radius is 2 pi r. So this means on your calculator you're going to type 2 times pi times our radius, which is 4. Okay, and if you do that, you'll probably end up getting 8 pi on your calculator. If you do get this, then make sure you push your SD button to make sure that you change this to a decimal, and you should get 25.1327, and this number continues on forever. Now the question's actually asking to give your answer to 2 decimal places, so it's asking you to round your answer. Now, if you remember, 2 decimal places means that we're going to have 2 decimal numbers after that decimal point. So we just need to check, okay, so 3 is the second decimal place. We just need to see whether that's going to round up or stay the same. And that 2 next to it tells me that that number is going to stay the same. So we're going to give our answer 25.13, and because it's circumference, it's a distance, is going to be in centimeters. Okay, the second question, it's asking you to give the area, okay, and this time it's asking you to give your answer to 3 significant figures. So the formula for area is pi r squared. Now remember that squared means times by the radius and twice. So we're timesing by the radius and timesing by the radius. So on our calculator we're going to type in pi times 4 times 4 again. And again, you'll probably be hit with exactly the same problem that your calculator will give your answer 16 pi first. Push your SD button and you should get the answer 50.2654, and the number will keep going. Okay, so this time your question's asking to give your answer to 3 significant figures. Now, what that means is that instead of counting the decimal places, we're going to start counting from the very first number, this 5. And we can see that the third significant figure is 2. It's the third number that appears, it's the third digit that appears in our number. So we're just going to have to check, is that 2 going to round up to a 3 or stay as a 2? Now, that 6 next to it is bigger than 5, so it's going to make that 2 go up to a 3. So we get 50.3. And because it's area this time, it's not going to be centimeters, it'll be centimeters squared. Okay, so the second example, this time instead of being given a radius, we're given a diameter. Okay, so the circumference this time, we're not going to use the 2 pi r formula, we're going to use the formula pi d, pi times the diameter. So in this case, we're just going to do, on our calculator, pi times 7. Okay, so pi times 7 on our calculator will give us 7 pi first off. Push that SD button and you get 21.99114, and the number keeps going. So this time the question is asking you to round it to 3 decimal places. So doing it to 3 decimal places means that, again, we're going to look at the third decimal number, which is a 1 here. Just as before, we're just going to check to see whether that 1's going to round up or not. It doesn't in this case, so we get 21.991 centimeters. Okay, so this last question here where we need to calculate the area. Again, we've only got one formula for this, which is pi r squared, which doesn't actually use the diameter at all. So firstly, we've just got to have a little think of what the radius would be. So in this question here, the diameter is 7, so the radius is going to be 7 halved, 7 divided by 2, which is 3.5 centimeters. So now we've calculated that, we can put that into our calculator. So that's going to be pi times 3.5 times 3.5. And that should give you an answer if you push your SD button of 38.4845, and again the number will keep going. So this time the question's asking you to give your answer to 2 significant figures. So again, we're just going to identify which number is in the second significant figure place, which in this case is an 8. Okay, again, you've got to check, will this round up or will it stay the same? That 4 next to it says it's going to stay the same, because remember, we're always looking to see whether it's 5 or bigger. So that will give us 38 centimeters squared. Sometimes they don't give you full circles, and sometimes they'll give you parts of circles to work out. So here I've got a semicircle, and the first question is asking me to work out the area of the semicircle. So first off, I'm just going to try and recognize whether this 10 centimeters is a diameter or a radius. Okay, so if I just put in, with dots, the rest of the circle, okay, you'll probably see that this here is a diameter, not a radius. So we need to calculate the radius first. And the radius, if you remember, is half the diameter, okay, which is 10 halved, which is 5 centimeters. Now, in order to work out the area of the semicircle, again, we're just going to put down the formula for the area, pi r squared. But if you remember, after we've done the formula, we've only got half of our circle. So we actually need to half pi r squared. So on our calculator, we're going to do a half. times pi times the radius, which is 5, times 5 again. And so we get the answer of 15.7079, and again this number keeps on going. Now, if the question doesn't actually stipulate whether to round to a decimal place or a significant figure, the safest thing to do in this case is to just write down your entire calculator display. But if you want to be a little bit more professional, you can write this to 3 significant figures, because this is the standard. So 3 significant figures, we're going to count from the front, and we see that 7 sitting in the 3rd place. So we just need to check whether this 7 is going to round up or stay the same. It's going to stay the same in this case, so we've got 15.7 centimeters squared for area. So the second question wants us to work out the perimeter of the semicircle. Now, if you notice, the semicircle is made up of 2 parts, okay? It's made up of the circumference, or half of the circumference, and this straight line diameter. So what we're going to work out first is half of the circumference, and remember we've got those 2 formulas to use, so it doesn't matter which one you do, but I'm going to use pi d, pi times the diameter, because that was what was given in the question to begin with. Okay, but remember I've got to half this amount because I've only got half of the circumference. Okay, after I've done that, I've got to add on the diameter, which is 10. So working this out, we get half times pi times 10, and then we're going to add 10 afterwards. So we're going to type that all into our calculator. We get the answer of 25.7079, and again this will keep going. So again, it hasn't stipulated whether to round or not, so I'm going to just practice a little bit of rounding by rounding it to 3 significant figures again. So that 7's in the 3rd place. It's not going to round up, so 25.7 centimeters.